everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, Forum reporter John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Is that right? Is it it's horticulture and not horticultural? So
you are correct. Horticulturist. Yeah,
I want to put an L in there.
That's one less syllable.
One less syllable.
So horticulturist is super.
Well, Don, today though, you are my ray of light. You're a beacon of hope, because we are at the end of February as we're recording this, and I think a lot of people who are like me look forward to you, because you will talk about things that are growing, things that we can grow. We're talking life. We're going to talk life and how to have that life around you. We're going to talk about houseplants today.
And the thing I love about houseplants, always have since I was a little boy, and it's that hope, exactly what you mentioned. You know, in winter, when our houseplants really give us that hope, they give us the breath of springtime. And so we can have it right there in our own home, in our living rooms, our family rooms. And yeah, it says springtime all year round.
Yeah, and I think, like when we talk about gardening, a lot of times we think about gardening outside, naturally, in the garden space. But really, like you said, you can have greenery inside all the time with you.
It does. And of course, my line of work, of course, is horticulture, but much more than just a line of work. This is kind of my life. I love it. This is my hobby, my pastime, and everything else. And I would have a hard time living without houseplants. Our house would be really, really dreary, especially in wintertime, if we didn't have windows full of houseplants.
So you used to run a garden. You had a garden center, right?
We did for about 20 years.
And did you have houseplants there?
Well, our garden center sold primarily vegetable and flower transplants and landscaping trees and shrubs. During the years that we had it, we were on a little bit of a when I say we, people were on a little bit of a downturn on houseplants. We didn't have the current houseplant fever that we have now, and that's why these times are so exciting right now for houseplants.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard this a lot, or we've heard different things, but I did look it up, and I found one study that said houseplant sales went up 18% during the COVID pandemic. Is that something? Does that seem pretty believable?
It does. When people turned inward, more time that we spend in our homes, the more people did buy houseplants. And really, I first became kind of attached to houseplants when I was a little boy, because my mom always had houseplants, my grandma had houseplants. A lot of those people always had houseplants, but they go in cycles a little bit. For example, in the 1960s, 1970s, every living room had a macrame plant hanger hanging from. You can still see the old ceiling hooks on some of those popcorn ceilings with plants hanging down. And so houseplants were popular then. Okay, so they do go in cycles, but during my lifetime here, I've never seen houseplant fever as contagious as it is right now, and this is wonderful.
If you ever watch an episode of Three's Company, right? Remember Janet, she was a florist, and so she had all these houseplants around, and she would always be watering the houseplants. And to me, when I think of 7 Days decor, I think of that. I do think of big plants. I think of the macrame hangers, absolutely. And part of the big houseplant craze, as I understand it, some of it did predate COVID. It's really been kind of on the upswing over maybe the last
has. So
decade.
It isn't just all related to COVID, but it has been building. And like I say, this it seems like new generations are discovering houseplants, and this is awesome.
What would you say is the most popular houseplant? If you had to guess, because I have an answer, but it's I want to hear what your thought would be.
Okay, the most popular houseplants. Oh, and the other thing that's nice and that is fueling this houseplant frenzy is there are so many more varieties available now.
Yeah.
So let me think. Well, pothos, another name for that is devil's ivy. It's the variegated one. That is very popular. Oh, English ivy I like, but I don't think that'll probably make the top 10 list. Monstera. Monstera with the kind of the Swiss cheese plant with the cut open leaves. That's popular. Huge leaves. Huge.
And it's a
tropical jungle-like
Yeah,
leaves.
it's a big plant.
So I would guess those might be in the top 3. The third, I can't wait for the answer.
Okay, so this was a gardening website, and what they did is, it's a little bit hard to get precise numbers, I think. But what they did is they asked a number, I think like 1,000 independent garden centers, and they said, what are your top 3 houseplant sales or sellers? And then what they did is they searched Instagram for hashtags with those plants. So number 1, so this is maybe not the most sold, but certainly the most popular as far as Instagram goes. The ones people are most excited about, succulents.
Oh, sure, succulents. Yeah, it was right in front of my eyes. Yeah.
Probably literally, because you can have them anywhere.
Succulents, that's a great, I can see why they're so popular, because the care is fairly easy too.
Yeah. You'll have people will have them in their office because, again, if they can be really small, you can do fun things with them.
And there's such a variety.
Yeah.
Everything from the snake plant to the actual cactus type succulents.
So succulents had the actual hashtag succulents, the all one entry there for hashtag succulents, had 13.2 million posts. What would you guess number 2 is?
Well, I'm still stuck on that Monstera, but probably not. Give me a hint. What's number 2?
It starts with a P.
Philodendron?
It is.
Oh, yeah, philodendron. The other thing is so awesome about that is there are so many different types of philodendron. Everything from vining types to great big tropical with huge leaves.
So whereas succulents had 13.2 million posts about it, hashtag philodendron, 2.1 million posts. So that's how big succulents are. They for a small thing, they totally overshadow all the other plants.
Sure. Wow. So what's number 3?
Number 3, another P, pothos.
Pothos.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Pothos is wonderful. There's both a green leaf and a variegated yellow and green leaf vining type. Great plants.
So I called because I was trying to find out, more about the house plants, or at least try to find some data. And so I called 3 local garden centers or growers, and so I called Baker Garden and Gift, Botanical Brothers, and Country Greenery, and asked them for their top three sellers. Baker was philodendron, Hoya, and succulents. Botanical Brothers, pothos, philodendron, and monstera. And Country Greenery was pothos. I'm going to get this one. This is kind of tongue twister for me. Vermella? Vermella?
I'm kind of leaving you hanging on that one.
It's kind of, I think
sometimes there are different common names of things, and that one's not catching, that's not bringing forth any information from my little head.
But also Country Greenery peace lilies. And of course, peace lilies, a lot of us, recognize as a plant that you would get at a funeral.
Exactly. That's gotten the name of a funeral flower.
Yeah. But they also are really they will, if they're cared for,
they're great house plants.
Yeah, they're great house plants, and then they will bloom again. So they're really wonderful.
Exactly.
So Don, we were just talking about some of these local plant sellers. Baker Garden Gift, help me out here, Country Greenery.
Country Greenery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the Botanical Brothers, which just opened up right here across the street from the Forum. We're seeing kind of, along with the boom in interest, obviously, that means more places are selling them. More places are selling plants.
Yeah, it's exciting to see stores opening up that are houseplant specialty stores. That's exciting because they can provide lots of new types. And plant breeders are developing nice, exciting, I shouldn't say nice, but new, exciting, beautiful houseplant types. And it's nice to see the traditional garden centers handling more and more houseplants all the time with some very exciting types.
Well, in addition to the garden centers too, you're seeing, and maybe I should ask you this, let's say 20, 30 years ago, were you seeing as many houseplants in grocery stores and also in hardware stores now? I mean, you go to Lowe's, Home Depot, and Menards, and even in winter, they still have houseplant selections.
Yes, and of course, we never saw that in grocery stores years and years ago. We just didn't see plants sold in grocery stores. Some of the Kmart stores, I remember when I was in junior high, the first houseplant I ever bought on my own was an English ivy, a little English ivy I bought at Kmart and took home. And so, some of the retailers like that did sell them. They kind of had little garden centers. But boy, this is what is being offered today for sale at all these different stores is exciting.
Yeah, and just to kind of put this in perspective, like you were talking about growing up around houseplants, you always had them in your house. What were the houseplants that you were seeing then, and then what are maybe some variations of them that you see today?
The houseplants that a person used to see, that my mother had, my grandmother had, there were not many stores that sold houseplants. So the way that they got their houseplants was from cuttings or divisions given by somebody else. So they tended to be kind of your basic houseplants. When I say basic, some of the more common types, like the philodendron,
Yep.
or the pothos, English ivies, things that were fairly easy to propagate and to share. So they didn't have the stores that we have now.
I think we just sold my mom's house, and she'd been in there for probably 53 years. And there was a plant that we left there because it was too big to move into her new apartment. And it was a philodendron that had been there for at least 40 years. Some of these plants will just last forever too.
They will. And so that is fun, too. Yeah. I've had different reports of Christmas cactuses that were given by grandmothers or maybe great-grandmothers, and these are still being carried in the houses.
Well, no, so let's we talked about years ago. Let's come back to today. You told me before that winter is really a great time to buy a house plant.
It is, because that's the time we think about it. That's the time we really want these plants. Once gardening starts outdoors, we still want our house plants, but we can focus on outdoor type gardening. So it's really during the winter time that these house plants mean the most to us, when we're all hungry for something green. But it's a challenge because the house plants that we're going to go buy are tropical in nature. Most houseplants are either from tropical jungles or from tropical desert type climates, both of which are warm or hot. And if we take those plants, either succulent or a tropical houseplant, if we take them outdoors in temperatures below about 50 to 55, they can be shocked permanently and not recover. And so they don't even need to freeze, but just cool temperatures, chilly temperatures can shock them. So a challenge is when we're sitting in the North Country here and the wind is howling at 30 below, how do you get a plant that you've just purchased out of that nice warm garden center and get it home without ruining it? And a couple of secrets. One of those is when you go to a garden center, they're usually going to have plenty of wrapping material, but I always stick a garbage bag in my pocket. A big garbage bag, especially if you're going to buy a big plant, big size garbage bag. Okay, well, then when you get to the garden center or grocery store or somewhere where you're going to be buying a new plant, is to, first of all, ask them to wrap it up. Sometimes it doesn't occur to people. I've seen people take, such as poinsettia plants, which is tropical. I've seen people take those, grab it from the store, and walk out to their car in December without it covered. And that's pretty dangerous. So anyway, most garden centers or those that sell plants are prepared to wrap them for you. So if you set the plant inside a plastic bag, and then when you're drawing up the plastic bag around the plant, puff a little air into it to make a bubble, a warm bubble, and then fasten the top so that plant has a kind of almost like a little warm greenhouse around it. And then I pull out my garbage bag out of my pocket and put it in a bigger bag, so you've got a double air protection around that. And then have your car warming up out in the parking lot and run the plant out. So house plants need to be treated like a newborn baby. You wouldn't think of taking a baby out with no covering on. Right. So houseplants the same thing. But that's a really good method for getting houseplants safely home.
So we're talking about how to get houseplants out of the store. When you go into a store, what are some things that you should be considering? Because I'm sure not all houseplants are the same as far as built the same and the same needs. But then also, for if you live, these are by nature, these are going to be in your house. If you have light to one side, if you live in like a darker apartment, or if I lived I was in an apartment for so long that I couldn't really control the heat, so it got very, very hot. Are there certain types of plants that do better that you would recommend for different things? Like let's say if you live in an apartment that doesn't have great sunlight, what are some plants to consider?
And that's where the plant tag comes in handy. Yeah. Most plant tags have lots of good information, and they'll indicate the light level on there, whether it's highlight. And when a plant tag says highlight, it means during the wintertime, it's probably going to want to sit in front of a sunny window. Now, because the sun becomes very intense in the summertime, that same location, you might need to move that plant off to the side of the window a little. But in the wintertime, when the sun is more diluted and days are shorter, then those highlight plants like some sunshine. So if it indicates that it likes highlight, okay, that would be needed. If it's medium light, then maybe to the side of a window a little bit. And if it says low light, those are the types of plants that you could put in a corner on a coffee table. So do check the light level. And otherwise, they might have a few other type of cares. For example, generally houseplants could be put into two broad categories. The succulents that we talked about, so they're going to want a drier condition because that's more like their native desert, as opposed to the tropical type houseplants. They're going to want it a little more moist probably and decent. So the tags will have a good amount of houseplant care. And the tags have gotten much better because with this houseplant frenzy, people have wanted more information. And then once you also have the name of that houseplant, you can do a little searching online and find the care that plant will need.
Because we're talking about plants that are tropical in nature, you think of the tropics and you think of humidity. How do we control humidity in our house or in an apartment, things like that? Sometimes you see people spritzing their plants, like the leaves, with a little mister. Is that something to do, or should we keep them warmer? And understanding that what you were just saying, it'll have that on the tag, but just to give people an idea.
Right. And you bring up the good point about tropical and humidity, because a key to providing houseplants with the best care is to mentally know where they originated. Where were they native? So we mentioned tropical houseplants. They're native in tropical jungles, tropical rainforests, and of course the humidity is very high. So if we can duplicate those conditions, at least somewhat indoors, then that plant is going to be happy. So to the humidity, these plants they were native in tropical jungles. They love that humidity, and they don't like the dry furnace-heated air. So ways that we can increase that humidity around, you mentioned spritzing with a little mist bottle. That works. And also, of course, if you run a humidifier in your home, that helps too. And then locate plants away from the furnace ducts, the hot air blowing out, locate
the real
them
dry heat
away from that if you can. And then there's a couple other methods. Plants like to grow in a little community, rather than kind of being all by themselves. In jungles, they tend to grow with all kinds of other plants. So if you can group plants, 3, 4, 5 in a group, they'll have a shared humidity community within them. So plants kind of tend to grow. You don't have to, but they tend to grow well in a little grouping, and that'll share the humidity. Also, you can set plants on a pebble tray filled with water, but make sure that the pot is sitting up on the pebbles above water level.
Okay.
Otherwise, it would too much water would soak into the pot. But if you have water trays around, then that humidity will give a little microclimate of humidity.
Now, something that we were talking about before the show is that planting with rocks, or planting using rocks or pebbles in the mix, right? That is, and some people will try that. Is that good or bad?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When I grew up and watched my mom pot up houseplants, she would have a clay pot, and then she'd go in the back alley where we grew up in Lisbon and pick up little rocks and stones, and she'd put a layer of rocks down in the bottom of that clay pot. And when I'd ask, well, what you doing that for? Well, for drainage. Okay, so for years and years, it was thought that would help the houseplant to be drained better. And it's fascinating. They've done a lot of research on that, and they've shown that layer of pebbles actually impedes drainage. It sounds counterintuitive, but here's the idea. When water moves down through the potting mix, when it detects that layer of change in the rocks, the water stops and supersaturates the soil before the excess will drain on through. And that research has been duplicated many, many times. They can put moisture meters in and see exactly how it happens. So the drainage in houseplants is better if you do not put that layer of rocks in the bottom. Just fill the pot top to bottom with a good high-quality potting mix. Now, it doesn't mean that if you've got rocks in the bottom of your pot, it's going to die. My mom's houseplants did beautifully, but she was an experienced gardener who knew how to water. Overwatering is a common problem of houseplant death, and overwatering means that the soil stays continually too soggy. It doesn't mean that you're watering too often, but it means that it just stays too soggy. And if you have that layer of change in the bottom, it contributes to too soggy of a soil. So again, my mom, experienced gardener, she let the soil dry out really good in between, so her plants did fine. But for many of us who tend to overwater, just leave out that layer, and then you'll have even better drainage.
You're talking about potting soil. Is there a difference between a potting soil that you would use in an indoor, your indoor, your house plant inside, and then a potting soil that you would use outside in a pot, but that you're going to have outside in the summer?
We use the same all-purpose mix, and it's the mix that I like best is Miracle-Gro potting mix, not because I'm endorsing the Miracle-Gro company, but because that is a mix that is the most universally available. Miracle-Gro potting mix is available almost everywhere, from garden centers to hardware stores and everywhere. And I've had good luck both with houseplants and outdoor, and so that's what I use. Also, locally owned garden centers will usually have a mix that they suggest. It might be the mix that they use in their own greenhouses, or for potting up their houseplants. So that's always a good indicator too. And so how do you tell a good high-quality potting mix? They're well-drained, and they have a good oxygen exchange with the root system. One way to tell the difference between a high quality and a low quality when you're looking at a store is to lift the bags. The low quality type tend to be really heavy in the bag.
Okay.
The high quality are quite light. They have a lot of good peat moss, a lot of good drainage materials. You do have to wet them down good before you use them. Wet them down the day before and they become nice and mellow. But the lower quality types seem to be real heavy in the bag, and you don't want a mix that's real heavy in a pot because that tends to make it waterlogged, less oxygen, and less good plant growth.
In addition to there being more and more plants out there and varieties of plants, there's more and more different kinds of pots out there. Are there some things that people should look for in pots? Because, when you were talking about your mom, I'm sure growing up, you said that she probably had kind of like the very basic brown, the stereotypical brown clay pot.
Terracotta clay pot.
Yeah,
exactly.
And now there's so many ones that are painted. They're very decorated. Are there things that people should look for or consider when they're buying a pot?
The number one factor is a drainage hole.
Okay.
Yep, it absolutely should have a drainage hole so that excess water will drain out. Because when we water a houseplant, we want to apply enough so that the entire soil ball is wet, and that a little bit would run out the drainage hole, and then you discard that. So it does mean that a pot, you're going to need to put it on a drainage tray of some sort. Some come with their own drainage tray, but that drainage hole is very important. I still like the terracotta clay pot, and the reason for that is that clay breathes. It breathes through the outer perimeter of it, and so you get better oxygen exchange with the root. So plants grow well in an old-fashioned clay pot. The others work well too. Other pots work well too. It's fun to have some of the decorative glazed ceramic but some of those don't have that same oxygen exchange, and it's kind of fun to have that traditional houseplant look, but sometimes it's fun, like with succulents. It's fun to have those in a little fun-type container as well.
Yeah, to have a variety of color, a variety of presentations.
Yeah, so there's no wrong or right, but it's the drainage hole is the key.
So you picked out your plant, you've got it home, you found a good space for it, you've got good quality potting mix, and you got a good pot to put it in. After a while, how do you know when it's time to fertilize, and how do you know when it's time to repot? transplant.
When you
I
get
should
that
say.
new little plant home, it's wise to first take a look and see what's happening with the roots. And that means slipping the pot off. Sometimes those pots can be attached fairly tightly. And when you buy a plant, usually it's in a kind of a plastic greenhouse type pot. And so usually you do want to repot them. But to see if you need to bump it up to a larger size pot, that means we need to slip it out of the pot that it's been growing in. Sometimes they'll slip easily out, or you can run a knife along the inner edge, the inside edge of the pot, and then it should just slip right out. And the way to tell if a plant needs a bigger pot is to take a look at the root system. If you can see free soil, soil that's not occupied by roots, if you can see free soil, then it's probably okay in that same size pot. But if the entire root ball is solid roots and no free available soil left, then it's time to bump it up to a little bigger pot, and that will give some free soil for the roots to continue to grow into. So as a rule of thumb, you should increase the pot size. If it indicates that you should repot to a bigger pot, you should increase it by about 2 inches. That would give an inch of free soil on each side. For example, if it's currently in a 4-inch pot, you'd bump it up to a 6-inch diameter pot, and that'll give an inch on either side of the existing roots.
So is the best way to do that just to kind of, as far as like to check that, do you just essentially wait till it's a little bit drier and then pull it out a little bit and take a look? Is that the best way to pull it out of the pot?
They'll actually pull out a little better if the soil is moist.
Oh, it will? Okay.
Because if you pull it out and it's a little dry, if there is some free soil in there, it tends to fall away.
Okay.
And so you might put down a newspaper or a sheet of plastic. Newspaper is becoming an actual printed newspaper is becoming harder to come by.
Tell me about this, Tom. Yes.
So maybe a sheet of plastic.
Yeah.
And we still get the paper twice a week, so I'm good. But anyway, you put down a piece of paper or plastic, slip it out of the pot, and then take a look at it.
Now I've heard of these things, fungus gnats. Is that how big of a problem are indoor insects or different kinds of things like that for houseplants?
Fungus gnat is one of the most obnoxious and common little insects because they're a little black fly that flits around your plants, and they'll sometimes go to fruit. If you've got a banana on the counter, they'll flit around that. And fungus gnats are that little black fly that lays eggs in the soil. The eggs hatch into a larvae. The larvae turns into more adults. And so it has a constant life cycle going. So you could spray those little flies with an insect spray and kill those, but there's still eggs and larvae in the soil. So it's a continual problem, and they're annoying. So a very good product to control those fungus gnats, to kill that life cycle, is, and you're going to laugh at this, it's mosquito bits. It comes in. I saw your look. That was priceless, John. Mosquito bits. It's sold at hardware stores. Some garden centers sell it. So right under the headline on the little package of mosquito bits, it says also kills fungus gnats. It's a beneficial bacteria that when these granules are added to the soil, it inoculates the soil with this beneficial bacteria that only kills mosquito larvae and fungus gnat larvae. So if it kills the larvae, it breaks that life cycle. So even if the adult flies lay more eggs and larvae, it kills those. So you stop getting the adult generation produced. So it breaks and kills the life cycle. So mosquito bits.
So mosquito bits, do you put that in like when you plant your plant, or do you wait until you see this fungus gnats and then just layer it over the top? How do you incorporate that into the soil?
Well, that's one reason for buying a high-quality potting mix is it's less likely to have eggs in that soil, because definitely some of the lower quality potting mixes do have fungus gnat eggs in. Or when you buy a plant, make sure you don't see those little black flies flitting around that plant, because then that will get onto the rest of your plants. And so if you detect any of the little fungus gnats at all, then it would be a good idea to go ahead and treat. You don't necessarily have to treat proactively if you don't see any.
Now, you talked about we kind of setting up your plants in groups, and they will kind of, I don't want to say feed off of each other, but they enjoy being together, right?
Yeah, they're in a community where they're native.
Yeah.
And so they grow up kind of in community with other plants.
But that kind of interaction goes also for humans and plants, right? I mean, there are definite health and mental well-being benefits to having plants, aren't there?
Oh, and that's been well studied. There's fascinating studies that have been done in hospital rooms, where there have been houseplants in hospital rooms where people have come in and cared for the houseplants. Patients get out quicker. There's less need for pain medication. These have been well-documented studies. Also in office buildings, there's documented studies where if there's houseplants, the office workers have lower blood pressures, and also in other settings, there have been less confrontations where there's houseplants around. And so there are definite health benefits.
Yeah, that's one of the things is that plants, they attribute having houseplants around to productivity and to being able to focus more on work or tasks at hand, right?
Exactly. And in the same way that pets can help, humans aren't just helping pets. The pets also help humans to kind of just interact and kind of that nurturing thing. Well, for some of us that don't have other pets, our houseplants are our pets. And you get that same benefit from that, other than, man, I love going to our dining room window where I've got all these plants and I look outside, there's snow on the ground, but man alive, these plants, I am in springtime.
When you talked about pets and houseplants, we have 2 dogs and a cat. The cat has a real interest in some of the plants, and the dogs have sometimes knocked them over. Any thoughts as far as are there? Well, first of all, we should know too, because talking about some plants are really can be poisonous to animals, right? I mean, poinsettia is one of them.
Well, actually, interesting you brought that up. Poinsettia was believed to be poisonous, but apparently nobody tried eating it or feeding it to anyone. The poinsettia has been determined not to be poisonous. It was thought to be poisonous up until the 1970s, but then they did studies and they fed rats with 300 poinsettia leaves, and the rats just became fat. They didn't die, and so that has been debunked. So poinsettias are not toxic, but it also doesn't mean you should eat them because they could cause some stomach upset and vomiting or something, depending on the person. But that brings up a good point about houseplants and other animal-type pets. Because, I call our houseplants our pets. But animal-type pets, there are good online sources. If you check plants toxic to animals, you'll come up with some. Let's see, I'm searching my brain for the most reliable. It's the Society for Cruelty to Animals.
Yeah, something like that. SCP, something, I can't remember, but yeah.
Yes, but if you look for a reliable source like that, it'll indicate which plants are toxic. And again, when we say toxic, it doesn't necessarily mean that if a pet eats a leaf, they're going to die. But toxic can mean that it causes stomach upset as well.
It can be an irritant.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we've had that with our dogs getting in something in the yard, and that's one of the things that we're kind of concerned with. You talked about, you guys. Do you like the term plant parent?
I like that.
Do you call yourself a plant parent?
I like that. Well, I've never termed myself that until I heard that term being used. But I'll be a plant parent. And that also brings up a good point about why some plants die for people. I mentioned overwatering. But a key in houseplant care is giving it what I call intentional care. The same way that we would care for an animal pet. The better care you give them, it's kind of a mutual thing. They do better. So intentional care of a houseplant means that you're actually watching and observing that plant. So watch when it needs watering. Don't let it get all stressed from getting too dry, or don't over baby it. You wouldn't force feed your pet when they're not hungry. And so again, just that intentional care, watch and observe the plants, and they respond.
We were talking about different studies about the benefits of plants. And there was one, you said it's kind of maybe not notorious, but a well-known study. There was a study by NASA in about 1989 that said that houseplants could remove about 87% of airborne toxins. And that study, while it's still out there, has kind of been not necessarily debunked, but people have pointed out that it's maybe not realistic for current living, right?
Because it was done in kind of a sealed chamber.
Yeah.
So, a controlled sealed chamber. And of course, our house isn't a controlled sealed chamber. But The point of that study was that these plants, and certain plants are better than others, at removing toxins, even such things as formaldehyde that's used in the glue of our couches and things in our homes. And so there are those air toxins. And so houseplants have been shown to be able to remove that. But, of course, a house has lots of airy rooms. So the more plants, the better. But I saw a study once that an average room should have about 10 houseplants in to have that effect. So you do have to have quite a few. But even if they help a little bit, it's removing. And some of the plants that I believe in that study that were shown, things like snake plant, sansevieria, maybe Boston fern, palms maybe. And so there were some definite species that were even more effective at taking toxins away.
Yeah, one of the other ones, or a couple of the other ones, a bamboo plant was one of them that I saw, and rubber plants.
Sure.
And a ficus, too.
Yeah, ficus. And those are all great houseplants.
And also a peace lily. Which
Yes.
Getting back to the peace lily, which is another reason to kind of have one around. Speaking of snake plants, that is the number one most Googled plant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that comes up. And a snake plant is what's the other name for a snake plant?
Oh, well, a couple of names for snake plant. The botanical genus is Sansevieria.
Okay.
It's also nicknamed mother-in-law's tongue.
Yes.
A snake
the
plant.
one that I remember, yes.
Snake plant, sword plant.
Yeah, and so these are the very kind of upright, sharp leaves.
Exactly. They're kind of shaped like a sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, an upright sword growing all from kind of a central base down at soil level. There's variegated type and solid green type.
Now, one of the things that, we were talking about this interaction between people and plants, one of the things, and I want to see if you, how much stock you put into it. There's a notion, or maybe it's just always been kind of an old tale, but singing to plants. Singing to plants is beneficial for the plants. What do you think?
I think there's probably something to that. And here's my rationale. And I think there's probably been studies done with music done to plants, but I'm not sure how easily replicated that was. I've never seen really hard and fast. But here's my thought behind why that helps. If you're willing to sing to your plants, you're probably going to give it pretty good care on other things.
Right.
And so you're probably going to know the watering. You're probably going to know when to repot it. So if you're taking the step to sing to your plants or talk to it, chances are you're giving it other good care too. Do I sing to my plants?
Yes, that is what I'm going to ask. Yes, it is. That's where I'm going.
I saw your brain working there. I don't.
Okay.
I probably mumble to them a little if they aren't growing well. But no, I don't talk to them. But, maybe it's kind of a silent wavelength, that you're interacting with your plants kind of mentally like. And part of that mental is just being aware of what they need. Well,
and then also just like being around them. I think just the exchange of breathing out, all that. It's just this exchange to have them around and the fact that they give you something that's really nice to look at, something that's really comforting.
They give us springtime and winter.
They do. Well, Don, thanks a lot for talking about houseplants today. I feel like now I need to go home and sing my plants some Barry White or some Marvin Gaye or something sweet and loving like that to know.
Record it. Make sure you record it.
I should.
You're doing that.
We can bring that and put that on next
please.
week. People have questions for you. How should they reach you?
The easiest way is email. And that address is donald.kinzler at ndsu.edu. So I'll spell that, donald.kinzler, Kinz as in zebra, LER, at ndsu.edu.
And how else can people find the wealth of information that you have? Where you're out there in a lot of different places. Where else can people find and read about you and hear from you?
Yeah, a good spot is to just do a search of NDSU Extension Cass County, and that will bring up our page.
Okay. And then you also do fairly regular webinars, right? You've got one coming up?
I do, on March 8th, talking about all things pruning. We'll talk about everything from pruning apple trees to trimming landscape shrubs.
And that helps us think about the outdoors, which helps us think about greenery, which really just gets us through this time of year.
It does, and the pruning season is usually in April before things start to leaf out. So when the weather moderates a little bit, we can get out and start pruning.
Well, we'll talk about that and more in upcoming episodes of Growing Together, a gardening podcast. I'm John Lamb.
Don Kinzler.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.